Just a very quick notice before we get into this. That is to say, the book of Daniel is really split into two halves, chapters 1 to 6 and then 7 to 12. And 7 to 12 is more about Daniel's visions, okay? Now, in this series, we're looking really at chapters 1 to 6. And then next year at some point, I intend to do chapters 7 to 12. So it's just a heads up for the future. And the second thing is just to remind you, the last time we looked at this story, the story of Daniel, we looked at Daniel chapter 2, the first passage, part of the passage. We thought really about how Daniel, one man, had become so influential. Became incredibly influential. We find at the end of this passage, he becomes even more influential. In fact, he became the most influential person in the kingdom after the king himself. And that should encourage us. You see, it's not about necessarily how many we are, rather it's about the influence that we have, and we want to be people that influence those around us. That is absolutely critical. We can get hung up on how many people out there aren't hearing the gospel. Well, we want to do something about that, certainly. But we are to be influencers, and Daniel was a great influencer. And if we're to live well, then we need to learn from the story of Daniel. So we're focusing today on Nebuchadnezzar's dream. A dream of a great statue and made of different parts. And we're not going to spend a great deal of time focusing on each part, just to say what those parts of the statue represent, mainly. Well, Daniel makes it clear, doesn't he? We just heard the reading. That each part of that statue represents a kingdom. The first, the head of gold, was Nebuchadnezzar. Okay? Represented a powerful kingdom, the most powerful kingdom at the time. There was no other empire like Babylon. And the empire that followed it was a lesser empire, and so it kind of went like that. They were less in terms of their quality, as it were, their impact in terms of culture and all that kind of stuff. Less in terms of their strength, until, of course, you come to the last empire, or the fourth empire. And so now that's really all that Daniel says. He says, you are an empire, after you will come another, and then another. And he says of the last empire that it will be strong like iron, and yet at the same time brittle like clay. And in the time of this last empire, a stone will be cut from heaven. Lots of translations say a rock. It is the word is stone. There's another word for rock. So it's not a rock, it's a stone. It's something less significant than a rock. And that's important. A stone is cut not by the hands of men. It will strike the statue's feet and completely shatter the statue. And it will be crushed into like powder, like chaff that gets blown away without trace in the wind. That's what this stone will do. And then it says this stone will become a mountain that fills the earth. Now that is Daniel gives the dream and the interpretation. Now, here's the thing. Daniel gave that dream and that interpretation at that time for those people. And that would have become known all over the empire. And all the Jews that were in exile, that the whole idea was they would be encouraged by this. They would be encouraged by it. And I want to talk about two groups that would have been in exile that would have been encouraged in two different ways. And then we're going to think about how we look back on it and how it can be an encouragement to us living today. So, for the Jews then, living in exile, when they heard this vision, there are two groups. There were those who knew very much that they were in exile. In other words, people like Daniel. This was a very small number among the exiles. Very small, probably just Daniel and his friends at the time. Who knew that they were in exile. This is what I mean by that. Not just that they had been carried away into a land of captivity, but they knew that not only this land was not their home. They would have looked back not to Israel, where they had been carried away from, although they would have looked back to Israel. But you see, when they were in Israel, the people were living in rebellion against God anyway. It wasn't like it should have been. They'd have looked even further back, perhaps to the time of King David, when God's rulers were reigned and ruled in the earth. And they'll have looked back to that and they'd have thought how far we've drifted. And now here we are, we're not even in our own land. But in fact, Daniel and his fellow men, Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego, they knew the word of God. So in terms of thinking of exile, they'll have understood that even the promised land that they had lived in, that David had once ruled over, and it was a great nation, they'd have understood that even that was something of an exile, because they knew the word of God. And they knew that an exile, even when they were in that promised land, had already taken place, another exile, an even more profound one. And that is the exile from Eden, of Adam and Eve. You see, God, when he created this world, he created a home for man, and he created a garden in that home and prepared it for Adam and Eve, the first human couple. And, in that garden, think of it like this. God had specifically designed Adam and Eve, okay? And he specifically designed, as it were, their environment. It was for them. Yeah, everything about it was perfect. It was 28 degrees centigrade all the time. Sun shined. It rained between 4 a.m. and 6 a.m. Something like that. It was absolutely ideal. Everything about it. Every day was absolutely beautiful and so pleasant. We have those mornings, don't we, when you go out and you just think this is just almost perfect, right? And then by the afternoon, it's not. Well, that afternoon never, ever came. Really, it was perfect. It was delightful all the time. There was food in abundance. There was the joy of seeing all these different animals, and, that was home. But they sinned, didn't they? And they were kicked out of Eden, exiled. And then the promised land was a kind of a picture of what they had been exiled from, but it wasn't the real thing. But always they looked forward to a day when something like Eden again would be established for God's people. And you can imagine that when they went into the promised land, the people of Israel first entered the promised land, and they started driving out the nations, and David was reigning and everything was going great. They may have thought maybe this is going to lead to this kingdom that we've all looked forward to. But then David sinned, didn't he, terribly? And anyway, lots of people sinned still. And they'll have had storms, and it wasn't perfect. But it was a picture. And then here they are now. They don't even live in that land. They're exiled again in Babylon. And in Babylon, everything was bad news, okay? All the values of the people of Babylon were completely in opposition to that of the people of God. So for Daniel living in that place, it must have been really hard. And for his friends as well. They knew they were in exile. But do you know? A lot of the people that would have come from Babylon, you think of Daniel's friends, they were godless in Israel, and they find themselves in Babylon, and particularly the first group that were taken with Daniel, for them this wasn't so bad, this Babylon. They ate the food from the king's table. Yeah, we're talking about thousands and thousands of Israelites. They ate from the food from the king's table. They drank the wine. They were given the best education, the best possible education. They had guaranteed jobs serving the king. I mean, this is a great career step for them. Here's the thing. They didn't really understand that they were in exile. They didn't understand. They thought this is good. And so this vision, it reminded Daniel and his friends, that group of people, that yes, you're in exile, and yes, this is bad, but there are kingdoms. What you're in now is not going to last. It's passing. All this that seems so permanent, they'll have looked around and seen the architecture, this city. It was an amazing place. If you've ever heard of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the world, absolutely amazing. It would have seemed also permanent. This vision told them, no, it's passing. It's not going to last. It will pass, and then there will be another kingdom. And then another after that, and then another after that. But during that kingdom, the God of heaven will act. A stone will come, cut out not by the hands of men. And it's a picture of God's kingdom spreading all over the world. And so for Daniel and that, it would have encouraged them to not buy into this kingdom too much, to not give up hope. That's what it would have encouraged them. The others, it probably wouldn't have meant a great deal to them at first. But did you know, in Daniel's lifetime, the vision of that statue started to materialize, as it were. You see, the second statue was the body with 2 arms. And that represented the Medo-Persian Empire. This was the Medes and the Persians. There were 2 people groups, 2 nations that allied together. And they became the next kingdom. If we had, in another sermon, we'll look at more detail at some of this stuff, because it is absolutely phenomenal how the prophecies in Daniel are fulfilled. It really is an amazing thing. But the people will have seen this great Babylon that they've all bought into crumble. And then this new kingdom with 2 arms established. It would have alerted them that, hey, these things that, this vision that Daniel told about, it's true. And even the Medo-Persian Empire didn't last that long. And so Daniel and his friends will have been encouraged to know that in their lifetime they saw 2 of those kingdoms come to pass. It's like, only 2 more in 70 years, 2. That's not long, is it, really? You think about it, 70 years. Think about it like this, okay? It might seem like a long time, but 70 years, that's 70 years. That's like 70 times 1 year. That's quite a long time, but think about it like this. That's 1 person away. In fact, less than that. You think 1 person easily lives 70 years, don't they? In that sense, it's 1 person away. It's not far, is it? 1 person's life. They saw 2 kingdoms pass, 2 more to come. So they will have been encouraged. Daniel and his friends would have been encouraged. The people that were in exile will have begun, hopefully, to realise that all this is passing. Now, what about us? How can it encourage us? Well, it tells us, what they were told is that there is a kingdom that was going to be established during the time of the 4th kingdom that would outgrow, overcome, overtake, outlast every other kingdom, would spread over all the earth and would endure forever and ever and ever. There would be no successor to the king of that kingdom, ever. That's what they were looking forward to. That's what we look back to. And so, as we look back, we see so much more than they saw. Firstly, we can interpret it in more detail. There is actually quite a lot of speculation over the various kingdoms and over what they are, because often people, this is what they do. They read the Bible, they read a prophecy like Daniel, and they think, what does that mean? And they start imagining what it might mean and sort of hooking it onto all sorts of things. The thing is, the Bible tells us. We don't, when we're looking for, what does it mean? The first place to look is the Bible. And the Bible tells us that the first kingdom is Nebuchadnezzar, the second kingdom is the Medo-Persian kingdom. That's in chapter 5 and chapter 6. That is absolutely clear. In Daniel chapter 9, it tells us, chapters 8 and 9, that the next kingdom would be the kingdom of Greece. Now, at that time, it hadn't come to pass. And it tells us that it gives us real detail about this kingdom of Greece, that it would have this one horn it talks of. Well, that was Alexander the Great, that in the midst of its power would be cut down, where his life was cut short. And it says that 4 smaller horns would take its place. That was the 4 generals that split the empire of Alexander the Great into 4. But anyway, the Bible tells us that it was Alexander the Great, his kingdom. And we see that looking back in history. That's what happened, exactly what happened. And then the Bible also tells us indirectly through what Daniel says and through what Jesus says. Daniel speaks of the abomination that causes desolation standing in the holy place. Daniel prophesied about that, and that's like part of the fourth kingdom. Jesus tells us that abomination that causes desolation, he makes it clear that was the Romans. Because in his time, he said, when you see the abomination that causes desolation standing in the holy place, that was the temple. The holy place, the temple. Well, in 70 AD, the Romans sacked Jerusalem. They went into the temple, bearing the symbols of their gods. They took out all the holy articles, all the vessels and the lampstands, and then they burned the temple to the ground. But the abomination, it says, that causes desolation. And Daniel says that it causes the offerings to cease. That's what the Romans did in 70 AD. Jesus talks about it himself. And so we know it was those four kingdoms. We should be encouraged that we look back on what was written 700 years, or not long after that, before Christ, 500 odd years before Christ, sorry. And we can look back to that and see those things fulfilled. And we're told, aren't we, about a stone that during the time of that fourth kingdom, the Romans, a stone would be cut, not by that human hands, and would devastate those kingdoms. A stone. What does that remind you of? It's obvious, isn't it? The stone that the builders refused has become the head cornerstone. Speaking of Jesus, Jesus was born in Jerusalem, in Bethlehem, but raised in Nazareth, in Galilee, in that region, during the time of Roman occupation. And this one man went around preaching the good news of the kingdom. He was the king of the kingdom. He began to recruit people there and then. By his miracles, he established his credentials, showed that he really is the king, this great king. And here's what should encourage us. That kingdom that he began to establish then, no internet, no high-speed flights to get him to platforms here and there all over the world, without any of that kind of stuff, no television. He began a kingdom that has outlasted the Babylons, the Medes and the Persians, the Greeks, that has outlasted even the mighty Roman Empire. You can go and learn about all those other empires. You can visit the British History Museum and you'll see relics and statues and things from those empires. Do you know what? They're like gravestones, memorials to something that's now gone, long gone. And yet, the kingdom of Jesus now is all over the world, isn't it? It's spread all over the world. You can go everywhere to the far side of the world and you'll find the kingdom of Jesus spreading like a mountain, just as it tells us. And this should encourage us in two ways. It should encourage those of us who know, like them back in Daniel's time, who know that we live in exile. You see, there'll be some of us here who can remember back not that long ago when this country was actually very different. Very different. When there was some sort of moral outrage on the news, something terrible had happened, it was the church representatives that were wheeled out to give the moral view. That wasn't that long ago. I remember that. And some of us will remember that. And now we find ourselves living in a country that seems to be plunging at breakneck speed into all kinds of godlessness. And it's pretty baffling. We find ourselves just struggling to keep up, right? But then, and this is certainly for some of you younger ones, this is just normal. It just seems normal. This is, we hear about some of the changes in laws and we think, well, that's a good thing. And some of them are. There are good things. Like there was a lot of things like homophobia. Well, it's good that gay people aren't persecuted the way that they once were. But the normalisation of everything, things like gay marriage, think that it's, things that the way they are now, this is just the way that it is. The way that it seems to be is not the way that it is, okay, or not the way that it will be. Just like for Daniel and his friends, everything that seems so permanent, it's all changing. What you think, any of us think is normal today, tomorrow, you'll be thinking, what has happened? That's what you will all think. Let's think for a moment about marriage. 20 years ago, marriage meant this, and there was no question about it meaning anything else. One man, one woman for life. Okay, that was 20 years ago. Now, it's something different, isn't it? It's changed. It's been redefined. Listen, it hasn't just been a bit redefined, it's been completely redefined. So the building block of life has changed, so that now it's one man and one man for life. Or one woman and one woman for life. Or one man and one man not for life. Or one woman and one woman not for life. Each of those, or one man and one woman not for life. Or, this is what marriage can be now, one person that used to be a man who is now a woman married to a man for life. Or one woman that used to be, let me get this right, one man who used to be a woman married to another man who used to be a woman. That can happen now. And that can be for life or not for life. Right now, there is a bill being pressed, or an attempt to press a no-fault divorce bill through Parliament. And that means that people can just get divorced just like that. I've got a picture, Alan. Can you just show the picture? This is how fast things are changing. This is Shannon and Chris Newman's divorce selfie. This is a thing now. Divorce selfies. People celebrating divorce. Did you know in America there is someone that organises divorce parties for people? So when they get divorced, they celebrate it. It's a new birth, a new lease of life that they're celebrating. This is there is in Switzerland, I think it is. There's a divorce, what's it called? A break-up hotel or something. It's called. Basically, it's where you can go and get divorced in a weekend and celebrate it. And it's something, it's a hotel that you go to and it's all set up to facilitate a great divorce. And that's now in New York and they're looking to set them up in the UK. Okay, now that's marriage. That's marriage now. So in 20 years, if you think that you might think that that's all normal, and certainly the next generation are going to think that's normal. But do you know what? It's not going to last. Just like those other kingdoms didn't last. It'll either go one of two ways. It'll go even further, so that you'll have maybe a couple of men who used to be women and a couple of women who used to be men all married together, raising children that aren't even theirs. Incest is the next thing on the agenda. Consensual incest, a brother and a sister, if they both consent, why not? That will be the next thing on the agenda. Not just a brother and a sister, but it'll then go on a father and a daughter, a father and a son, a mother and a daughter. Now, for you, as you hear that, you might think, that is outrageous, that would never happen. Give it 20 years. Give it 20 years. Either it will go that way, or it will change again. Listen, nothing is permanent. Okay, this world we live in, as you look around, it is all changing. We are, even at this time, our country is going through massive changes. We've got Brexit coming, haven't we? Just around the corner. I was thinking about maybe a holiday next year, a holiday abroad, but hang on a minute. I don't know if I'll be able to do that. I mean, some of you know the trouble I get into America. Right? Hang on, I can't just go somewhere anymore. It gets complicated. And who knows how that is going to affect things. But we should be encouraged because we are banking not on all these passing kingdoms. They're going to pass and more kingdoms will come. But the kingdom of God will outlast them all until finally Jesus returns. And we don't know how long that's going to be, do we? What we know is this: we don't need to be worried or fearful about all that we see. We don't need to be worried or fearful. I was thinking, what do we need to do? What do we need to do living in a world that is changing at breakneck speed, where everyone, the next generation, thinks this is normal, but in a generation's time they'll be thinking, what on earth is happening to this world we're living in? That's what's going to happen. Happens with every generation now. Things are changing so quick. What should we do? What do we need to do? Well, it's very simple, really. I can't put it more simple than this. We just obey the Lord Jesus. Simple as that. But here's what that means. It means recognizing that he is building his kingdom. We are part of this mountain, right? That's spreading all over the earth. That mountain, do you remember we thought about it in a couple of sermons ago with Daniel? That this church is like an embassy of Christ's kingdom. So that the world out there living in all that confusion, they should be able to look into the church and see Jesus rule and reign. Here's the big challenge for us. It's being that community that is distinctive and set apart. So that as the people out there look in, they see us holding to values that don't change because they're values of God's kingdom that doesn't change. One of the things I think that will be, churches nowadays, they're all jumping on the bandwagon of being contemporary and all this business. Listen, I've got nothing against that, okay? But with things changing the way that they are, people are looking for something that's not changing, actually. Stability. Something that they can rely on. Something that's more than just a passing phase that who knows where it's going. People are looking for that, and they should find that in the church. There should be unchanging values in the church because they're kingdom values. What Satan wants to do is to tempt us to value the things of the world, just like Daniel's friends, or not his friends, those around him did. They bought into the wine and the food from the king's table. Everyone around them was pursuing that stuff. Daniel didn't. He restrained himself from those things. And we need to learn to say, all of us need to learn to say yes and to say no. And we get better and better at that, hopefully. Rather than being pressured into doing things that we don't want to do and being dragged along with things that we don't want to be dragged along with because of our peers are going along with things, we need to learn to say yes and we need to learn to say no. But here's the really important thing. The really important thing about that. We need to learn to say yes to God and his kingdom and his values and all that he is doing, and learn to say no to the world and its values. Because if we only learn to say yes and to say no, then we'll just be living our own independent lives, me at the top of the kind of authority, rather than seeing God's kingdom built. Brothers and sisters, at our away day, we talked a little while ago about some changes in the church, didn't we? And I'm going to be visiting you, talking about some of those things. Now, part of the purpose of those changes is because we want to display together what it looks like to be an outpost of heaven on earth. We want to together show and put on display some of those values as best that we can. And Sunday morning is a time when we gather, when we can do something of that. We're limited. There's a limit to what we can do. But we want to do that. And so as I come and visit you, and as we talk about that, we know there's always a cost for things. Nothing's going to suit all of us all the time. And but we do it for the greater good, as it were. We want to. It's critical that we be the best that we can be as the people of God together. And so as we talk about this, what we presented at the away day, maybe that's not the best thing. And that's partly why we want to speak to you, but we want to do the best that we can to be that people of God.